Hey everybody, I'm in the process of becoming a commercial pilot right now, so I thought I would share the information that I'm learning along the way to help you all who are thinking about doing the same thing. It's actually not as complicated as it sounds, but it does take time, effort, and a love for flying. Alright, so when I enrolled in a nearby flight school, I thought I was going to go up on my first day and be thrown into something like this. And I was wrong. It's a lot more low-key, less intimidating, and dogfighting generally isn't part of the curriculum. Depending on what school you go with, you're usually in a one-on-one setting with your flight instructor where he'll go over some brief classroom information with you, but most of your time together will actually be spent in a plane in the sky. Sounds great, right? Well, not so fast. There's some things you need to know before you're ready to get in the cockpit. So let me walk you through some of those starting qualifications. First, before you can even start flight training, you have to meet a few basic requirements. You need to be at least 17 years old to get your private pilot license, which is the first license that you'll get if you're not counting the student pilot license. You have to read, speak, write, and understand English, which is an international rule, and you'll need to pass a simple medical exam from an FAA-approved doctor to make sure you're healthy enough to fly. Secondly, you don't need a college degree to start flying. A high school diploma is enough to begin flight training, but if you're thinking long-term, like becoming an airline pilot, then getting a degree can really help if you're applying for airline jobs later on. All right, next let's talk about the flight training path. Here's the general path most pilots follow. So first, you'll get your student pilot certificate. This lets you start your lessons and fly with an instructor. You'll get a nice little card in the mail with the Wright brothers in the back of it. It's really neat and it's cool to show your friends. But the first big one is the private pilot license. This is where you really start flying solo and learning how to handle a plane. You'll need at least 40 hours of flight time. Some schools, depending on where you go, will give a minimum of 35, but 40 is generally what you'll be required to have in order to take the exam to get your private pilot license. All right, secondly, you'll see an instrument rating. An instrument rating is an add-on to your pilot license, usually your private or commercial pilot license. But typically the order that most schools go in, it'll be after the private license. And this allows you to fly an aircraft using only the instruments in the cockpit, or IFR, which is Instrument Flight Rules, instead of relying on what you see outside, which is VFR, or Visual Flight Rules. Those we'll get into more in upcoming videos. And then thirdly, you're going to get the commercial pilot license, or the CPL. Once you get this, you can start getting paid to fly through opportunities such as flight instructor or CFI, aerial surveying, aerial photography, sightseeing or charter flights, aerial banner towing, skywriting, crop dusting, air ambulance and medevac, cargo freight flying, ferry piloting, aerial filming, media work, corporate and business aviation. Okay, basically there's a lot. There's many opportunities with this license, but you'll need around 250 total flight hours to qualify. And then finally, if you want to fly for an airline, which is what most pilots generally end up working toward, you will need your airline transport pilot license, or your ATPL. This requires 1,500, that's 1,500 flight hours and a minimum age of 23 years old. All right, fourthly, let's talk about time and cost. Elephant in the room, training is not cheap. It usually costs between $10,000 and $20,000 just to get your private pilot license, which is the first one, and up to $80,000 or more to go all the way to commercial level. Most people take about 1 to 3 years to finish depending on how often they train. I didn't technically start my training until I graduated college, so what I did was I found the cheapest living arrangements I could and minimized my expenses such as groceries, gas, etc. I found a decent paying job that offered growth opportunities, and the majority of each paycheck I would get would go toward flight lessons. I also set aside about $230 for ground school, which is just online courses that are necessary to pass your check ride and knowledge exams. I recommend Gold Seal personally. I use them from the very beginning and they've really proven to be helpful. However, my goal is to put everything you need to know on this channel so that your need for expensive ground schooling is very minimal. All right, lastly, and arguably most importantly, let's talk about medical requirements. So aviation authorities like the FAA in the US or the CAA in the UK require pilots to pass a medical examination to ensure that they're physically and mentally fit to operate an aircraft safely. So there's 3 classes of medical certificates depending on the kind of flying you plan to do, but generally you don't technically need one until you're ready to go solo or fly on your own. For the first class medical certificate is for airline transport pilots or airline captains. It's valid for 6 months for people ages 40 and up, and is valid for 1 year for people below the age of 40. It is the highest medical standard. Second class certificate is for commercial pilots. It's valid for 1 year for all ages, and it's for jobs like charter, cargo, banner towing, etc. And that leaves the third class medical certificate, which is for student, recreational, and private pilots. This is valid for 2 years for those that are ages 40 and up, valid for 5 years for those who are below the age of 40. As far as vision requirements, which seems like it would be the most pertinent for aviation, they will vary from 2040 to 2020 and so on based on which class of medical certificate that you're trying to get. But this can be with corrective vision like glasses or contacts. Bottom line, if you use glasses or contacts, it's important to bring those to your medical exam. I went to my first exam to get my first class because he charged the same for all classes, but I forgot my eyeglasses, so he'd only let me pass with a third class certificate. So don't make the same mistake I did. Bring your glasses or contacts. You must also be able to distinguish aviation colors like red, green, and white. If you fail the color test, you might still get a certificate just with certain restrictions. And I'll warn you, the test is a little more difficult than I thought it was going to be. Basically, they have 30 questions or so where each question flashes a number on the screen. The number is a certain color against a different colored background. The colors are close enough that it can be hard to decipher what the number actually is. So be prepared for that. Going into it, it sounds pretty easy, but it's actually a little more difficult than I thought it was. All right, other important things to note. You must be able to understand conversational speech from 6 feet away with or without hearing aids. You can't have any severe heart diseases or uncontrolled hypertension. If you have a history of fainting, things could get difficult as well. At age 35, you will be required to take an electrocardiogram or ECG, which is pretty much a medical test that records the electrical activity of your heart. You must not have any history of epilepsy or seizures without specific special medical clearance, any history of psychosis or bipolar disorder, severe anxiety or depression that interferes with judgment or focus, no drug or alcohol dependence or abuse within the last 2 years, and just be aware that random drug and alcohol testing is mandatory for airline and commercial pilots. Don't worry, they don't do any of that stuff when you're first starting. Finally, and this is kind of a given, but you must not have any condition that could cause sudden incapacitation, such as uncontrolled diabetes, severe sleep apnea, or serious neurological disorders. Also, it is important to note that there is an alternative to the typical medical certification process that we just discussed, and that's called Basic Med. I'm not going to get into that in this video. There's plenty of information on that online. Just know that you need a valid driver's license and a prior medical certificate to be eligible. So I know that seemed like a lot of medical regulations that I just threw at you. You don't have to memorize every single one of those things I said. Just know, just use your common sense and realize if there's anything that's going to incapacitate me while I'm flying, that's a problem. If my vision is terrible, that's a problem. If my hearing is terrible, that's a problem. So just remember those basic things and you should be okay. All right, last thing, there are 2 classifications of private pilot training you can undergo. There's Part 61, which is not officially FAA approved, but it is still taught to FAA standards. Teaching style is more flexible. And there's Part 141. This is FAA approved. The teaching style is more structured and methodical. There's a minimum of 35 hours of course time before you can receive a CFI endorsement. That's pretty much where your instructor gives you the green light to go ahead and take the final exam. Both Part 61 and Part 141 result in a private pilot certificate. And even though Part 61 is not officially FAA approved, the FAA will still recognize that you have a private pilot certification if you got it through Part 61. So don't worry about that. All right, that's all I'm going to cover in this video, but that's pretty much the basics of what it takes to start the process of becoming a pilot. Some people will tell you that you have to be really good at math and physics in order to fly a plane, but I'm living proof that that's not necessarily true. I'm awful at math and I passed high school physics with a C, and I'm managing just fine so far. Sure, there's aerodynamics and mechanics of planes that you'll have to learn and retain, but I promise if you keep your head down and just put your mind to it, it will prove to be very doable for you. Thank you guys for watching. I will see you in the next video.